If you don't trust Jesus, you won't obey him, even when it gets hard, especially. And the disciple is all about trust and obey. You notice those words, at once they followed. I think that speaks of nerve and some, I mean, these guys got after it with a sense of urgency. This is not dipping their toe in the pool, you know. These guys dove in because they trusted. I'll never forget the tragic story of Joe Delaney. Some of you remember him. 25 years ago, star in the NFL. Played for the Kansas City Chiefs. 24-year-old kid, was in the Pro Bowl. Hottest young running back in the league. But one day he's sitting under a shade tree in a park and he hears voices of distress, and he hops up and he goes to the edge of this big pool, this big deep pit where kids were swimming, and these kids, clearly over their heads, ages 10 and 11, two boys and a cousin, are thrashing and flailing around, and they're going down. And Rick Riley, who wrote the article I read about this, says, what in the world would possess him, this guy, Joe Delaney, who could not swim to save his life? What would possess him to dive into that pit to try to save those kids? And why him and no one else? I mean, hundreds of people in the park that day, but Joe Delaney dove in. And he pulled one of those kids to safety. But the other two boys drowned, and so did Joe Delaney, attempting to save them. And so they got a place, you know, in Kansas City where they named after him in the park, and they teach swimming lessons. And I think of Joe Delaney when you hear of some prima donna athlete that got arrested or beating up his wife or something like that. I think of Joe Delaney, who just dove in at once. And I think that is exactly what Jesus is asking of me. Friends, it is exactly, I don't know what version of Christianity is out there on the streets, but you and I both know that is exactly what he's asking of you. To dive in, even when you know it's over your head. That's what the world is looking for, is people who will dive in over their head without being so safe and calculated all the time. Aren't you glad? Aren't you glad Jesus dove in? Down, 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 down. All the way down. Philippians 2 says all the way down to this planet. Becomes human, takes upon the form of a servant, even death on a cross. Down clearly over his head. And then he says, if you want to follow me, you dive in too. Take up your own cross. And you dive in. And that's what it's about, friends. Paul says, I'm being poured out like a drink offering. That's it, right there. That's what the first disciples did. They dropped their nets and they dove in. Sometimes we got to do, it's not enough to do our best. Sometimes we got to do what's required. We're in that kind of time right now. We got to do what's needed. And that's diving in. Now, I want to remind us of one thing before we leave this, and that is that diving in, giving your life 100% for Christ, dropping nets and going after him, sometimes it's really dramatic like that, but you know, it always starts with one step. The journey of 1,000 miles, right? Starts with, there was one step those disciples took to get things started, and it's the same with you and I. I like how Fred Craddock thinks about this. He says, what would it really look like for me to give my life 100% to the Lord? What would it look like? He kind of pictures himself going into a bank and writing a check for $1 million and sliding it across the desk and so going, there you go, God, it's everything I got. And God, he imagines sliding it right back across the desk and going, well, I only take deposits of 1 nickel a day. 1 nickel at a time. Yeah. Sometimes going beyond means diving in. And sometimes it's giving your life away 1 nickel at a time. But either way, we're all in. And I just hope you don't miss it. I hope you don't miss it.